Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the IPHE Hydrogen Valley Forum, Policies and Actions on Hydrogen at a Regional Scale. This forum is done in concert with Mission Innovation IC8. My name is Tim Karlsson. I am the Executive Director of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy Secretariat. I will be your moderator for today's forum. The purpose of the regional forum is to learn about the latest strategies and policy initiatives from leading jurisdictions, gain insights into the issue and approaches by practitioners of the Hydrogen Valley Hub concept through practical applications on the ground. The expected outcome, we hope to have an understanding of the strategic vision and actions by policymakers leading to robust hydrogen valleys, and insights into the actions and key issues in implementing Hydrogen Valley-related initiatives and programs in regions across the globe. To start the forum today, we will get a strategic overview on hydrogen valleys and hydrogen valley developments. We will then get insights from the review of more than 30 hydrogen valleys around the world. This will be followed by a series of 4 presentations of unique hydrogen valleys from around the world, and then an extended question and answer period. I would ask that you please submit your questions via the chat function, and we'll do our best to try and work through them throughout the last portion of session. So to start, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, the first speaker for the day, Patrick Child. Patrick is the Deputy Director General, Research and Innovation at the European Commission. He is the Commission representative to Mission Innovation and co-lead of Mission Innovation's Innovation Challenge IC8, which is the Renewable and Clean Hydrogen Challenge. He leads the policy for implementation, impact and sustainable investment strategies, and is acting director for the Clean Planet. His directorate provides support to the EU energy, transport, environmental health, climate, and industrial policies, promoting clean, reliable, and secure energy production and use, safe and cleaner transport and urban systems, as well as cleaner industry. And with that, Patrick, please, you have the floor.
Well, thanks very much, Tim, and I'm very grateful to the International Partnership on the Hydrogen Economy for this opportunity to address you on one of the perhaps most prominent topics in the international debate on clean energy today. I think it's clear to all of us here in this gathering that the transition towards clean energy is a central part of our post-COVID recovery plans and also our global ambitions towards a clean and digital transition. And that hydrogen, and more specifically the Hydrogen Valley concept, has the potential to make a major contribution both to our post-COVID recovery and our broader environmental agenda. So to set the scene a little bit, I mean, I start with the place that clean hydrogen will play in the broader context of our transition towards the clean energy system. And then I'm going to speak a bit about what we're doing in the European level to promote our new hydrogen strategy and the place of hydrogen valleys within that, before then turning to the international context in mission innovation. So, I mean, the starting point, I think, is that clean hydrogen will necessarily play an important part in our clean energy transition. Hydrogen's potential to carry and store energy is a strategic opportunity to improve energy security, but also to decarbonize energy-intensive industries and transport. And decarbonizing our society and industry requires massive public and private funding if we're to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement and our objectives for climate neutrality. And so I'm happy, to start my presentation with a sort of summary of some of the key elements in the European Union's new hydrogen strategy, which aims in particular to install at least 6 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers in the European Union by 2024 and 40 gigawatts by 2030. But the EU strategy, of course, comes alongside the efforts in parallel of many countries across the globe who have recently announced hydrogen strategies with massive investments in the order of billions of euros. And I think with this sort of scale of our collective investment potential, it's crucially important that we are well aligned in our efforts so that synergies can be achieved and we can all make complementary efforts towards our common goals. And I think it's through international collaboration such as Mission Innovation and the International Partnership on the Hydrogen Economy, where we already work together, that we can all benefit from the synergies of this sort of cooperation. So starting with the what we're doing at the European level, and in particular the research and innovation activities that I'm directly involved in, the focus of our research and innovation work has been through our highly successful partnership with industry and the research community through the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking. And over recent years, the joint undertaking has developed an impressive portfolio of about €1 billion worth of projects. And this work has also underlined the need to understand and address the economics of the entire hydrogen value chain, from production, storage, distribution, and to applications and final use. And with this in mind, a few years ago, the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking published a first study on the development of business cases for a wide range of fuel cells and hydrogen applications in regions and cities. And building on the conclusions of this study, we launched a call for the first Hydrogen Valley projects in 2019 to showcase large demonstration projects with hydrogen as the energy carrier for various types of uses, both transport, power, heat, and industry. And this is a little bit the birth of the term hydrogen values, by which, of course, we understand a city, region, island, or industrial cluster, where a number of hydrogen applications come together in an integrated hydrogen ecosystem. So one of our first successful projects was in the northern Netherlands, the HEVEN project, with a €20 million funding from the European Union and 20 million coming from other sources. We also had the Big Hit project, which aims to create replicable hydrogen territory in Orkney in Scotland. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about this project later this afternoon. Because I think hydrogen valleys, or hubs as some other people call them, are really a very powerful way to demonstrate hydrogen technologies, as was recently highlighted by our President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the Union address in September. So building on these specific projects, the Commission is also supporting an initiative called 3SP, a partnership on hydrogen valleys involving more than 35 regions. And through this 3SP partnership, we are ensuring the coordination and exchange of research and innovation aspects with the different regions engaged. And this is an effective way of connecting up regions and their different research and innovation activities in the hydrogen space, consistent with the principle of synergy I mentioned earlier. Within this partnership, some of our key objectives are, first, developing technological readiness and commercial availability of hydrogen fuel cell applications, facilitating matchmaking and co-investment between different European regions, and strengthening the value chains for hydrogen fuel cell technologies through interregional cooperation, and thus contributing also to the greening of the production of hydrogen. A second important dimension of our strategy at European level is the setting up of an important project of common European interest on hydrogen. This is a policy framework which allows our EU member states to provide national public support for key sectors within our state aid rules. And as a result, these projects of important common European interest can accelerate investment flows into developing new technologies and their rapid deployment. And so we're working on an IPCEI project on hydrogen to coordinate investments from at least 2 EU member states for the deployment of large-scale hydrogen demonstration projects at high technology readiness levels. And a number of these planned projects will be hydrogen valleys and therefore feature in the Hydrogen Valleys database, which I know we're going to discuss more at this conference. But I turn now to the international dimension and the growing interest in hydrogen worldwide. There are ambitious investments underway in many parts of the world, including the United States and China and many other international partners. And some of the European Union's current energy suppliers are also looking for opportunities to export renewable electricity using clean hydrogen to the European Union. And an example of this is in Africa, where due to the abundant renewables potential and the proximity to Europe of North Africa, we have huge potential supplies of cost-competitive renewable hydrogen to the European Union. And so against this background of growing international interest, we have many opportunities to integrate an international dimension into our hydrogen policy. And I'd like to concentrate today mainly on mission innovation, following the announcement yesterday that I will be taking over the chair of the steering committee of this global initiative of 24 countries and in the European Union, working together committed to accelerating clean energy innovation. And one of the key themes of the work in mission innovation is that participating countries have committed to seek to double their government's clean energy research and development investments over 5 years, while encouraging greater levels of private sector investment in transformative clean energy technologies. And one of the themes of mission innovation is the Innovation Challenge number 8, the most recent to be added to the thematic priorities of mission innovation, which is surrounding renewable and clean hydrogen, which we are proud to co-lead from the European Commission, with partners also from Australia and Germany. The Innovation Challenge's objective is to accelerate the development of a global hydrogen market by identifying and overcoming key technology barriers to the production, distribution, storage, and use of hydrogen at gigawatt scale. And so within this Mission Innovation Challenge on hydrogen, we've decided to focus on 3 areas where global research and innovation efforts should generate the most value added and impact in the short term. And these are firstly demonstrating technology at scale and sharing learnings through the setting up of Hydrogen Valley's platforms. Secondly, heavy-duty road and off-road transport applications. And thirdly, hydrogen admixture into natural gas networks. So very much at the top of our list, we will be working on hydrogen valleys, and more specifically under the Mission Innovation envelope, we will be funding Hydrogen Valley's platform, which will include, we hope, detailed information about more than 30 projects across the world. This platform will go live in January of next year, and I know we're all looking forward to hearing more about it from Markus Kaufmann of Roland Berger, who will speak, I think, later this afternoon. The Hydrogen Valley's platform aims at raising awareness and facilitating information sharing as a basis for policy making, as well as promoting collaboration and rollout of new Hydrogen Valley projects. So while the platform will be publicly available, it will also create possibilities for private bilateral exchanges between different Hydrogen Valley promoters and projects through the platform. And looking further ahead, within the context of mission innovation, as we're preparing for a future new, more ambitious phase in the life of this important initiative, the European Commission is working alongside the UK, Australia, Germany, and Chile to prepare work that could ensure that hydrogen remains a key focus in the work of mission innovation as we prepare an ambitious new mandate for the next 5 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I think it's clear to us all that hydrogen has an extremely high global profile and is a necessary component in our climate change and decarbonisation agendas. This is clearly reflected in the European Union's hydrogen strategy, as well as in many national hydrogen strategies of EU member states and global partners. We have an urgent need, therefore, for coordination and collaboration to ensure that we find the right synergies and to realise the massive deployment that's needed for the hydrogen economy in order to help us towards our global commitments and the Paris Agreement. The European Union's Research and Innovation Framework Programme will continue to provide strong support for our work on hydrogen, including hydrogen valleys, with the creation of a new clean hydrogen partnership to build on the work of our existing joint undertaking. And as a powerful component of the European Green Deal, we are passionately committed to continued international cooperation in this vital field. So thanks, Tim, very much.
Great, thank you very much for that, Patrick, for those insights on the road ahead, and congratulations on your new role, leading role within Mission Innovation as well. That's great news to hear. I do want to congratulate you, your team, and of course the Commission for the vision that you have for hydrogen. I think this is a great leadership role that you're showing there for all of us from around the world. And I see that, as you mentioned, this forum is in some cases a bit of a teaser, a precursor to the launch of the platform information that we'll learn more about from Markus with regard to mission innovation and the work that's going on there. Just as an aside, it was great, the event last week, Europe Hydrogen Week, with Bart Biebuk and the FCXJU team along with Germany. So that was a great event. So again, I'd like to thank you very much for these opening remarks and setting the scene for us for the rest of the event. So thank you again. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to move on to the next segment of the agenda. And as one can imagine from time to time, there are technical gremlins that work in the system. But the objective was to have Markus Kaufmann from Roland Berger join. And so there are some technical issues that he is having right now. So what I would like to do is, if possible, I think we will switch the order of the presentations while we try and get Markus engaged and connected to the forum. And I would like to instead move forward and start with our series of presentations from the various unique ports. And so I would like to just give a signal to Randolf that we'll be going to you next to get a first presentation there, if that is okay. So we'll move on to the panel presentations and then come back to Markus later after we've gone through the sequence. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the first presentation on specific Valley activities that are underway. Randolf Weterings is the business manager and a new business development component of the Port of Rotterdam. Randolf is responsible for the electrification and hydrogen portfolio in the Port of Rotterdam. This portfolio covers the complete hydrogen value chain as all elements come together in the hydrogen hub at the Port of Rotterdam. And as the port is developing further towards green production and new sectors. So this is quite a unique angle, the full suite and supply chain within and the driver for the Port of Rotterdam. And so with that introduction, I'd like to pass it over to Randolf, and you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and for some, good morning and afternoon and evening. Let's see if I can pull the slides. Yeah, thank you very much. So it's a great honor to present the Port of Rotterdam here today. What I would like to do today in this presentation is to share our vision with you, but also the structure, how we have structured the hydrogen valley in the port, and to share the learnings and also the challenges that we face in order to grow in the direction of green hydrogen. So, but before we go into that into details, I would like to show you first the position of the Port of Rotterdam today. So today, around 30% of the total European energy demand, the energy demand flows through the Port of Rotterdam and enters Europe, and then find its way towards somewhere in the northwestern Europe part. And what you will see from this slide here, it's representing the Port of Rotterdam, and all the different elements in there, the different colors present the different activities that we have in the port. You see that the major part in the port is based on fossil energy. And of course, one of the major challenges and opportunities of the energy transition is the large-scale replacement of fossil energy with renewable electricity and carbon-neutral hydrogen. And I believe that in the coming decades, we will see this will change, not only in the port of Rotterdam, but also in other very energy intensive regions. So if we zoom in a little bit closer, we see that 30% of the energy demand for Europe represents around 8,800 petajoules. And just 5% of that sticks within the port of Rotterdam. And that 5% represents 20% of the total Dutch CO2 emissions. And in volume, it's around 29 million tons of CO2 emissions. That is every year. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, we also see that from that 5% energy, we see that there is also already a large-scale hydrogen market in the port of Rotterdam. So almost 500,000 tons of hydrogen is produced each year and also consumed each year in this area. There are 2 pipelines in the port of Rotterdam, and one is even connecting the port of Rotterdam with different locations in Belgium and in France. Those 2 pipelines are privately owned. So the one on the right-hand side is from Air Liquide. You see it with the red lines. It's the hydrogen pipeline of Air Liquide, and it's connecting the international energy or hydrogen market. So now zoom in a little bit more into the vision that we have of the port in the port of Rotterdam. So of course we haven't done that alone. We have presented and we have published this together with the different companies and validated with different companies in the port of Rotterdam, and also the stakeholders around us, because 95% of the energy is not going towards the industry in Rotterdam, but it's going to other regions in Northwestern Europe. You can also download it from our website. The link is in the bottom. But what I want to do is to focus on the 2050 ambition that we have. So in this vision, you see that we expect in 2050 around 20 million tons of hydrogen that flows through the port of Rotterdam to somewhere in the northwestern part of Europe. In that ambition, we took into account that we expect a significant increasement of energy efficiency in the future. And we also expect that part of the hydrogen production will be done locally. So not really as what we have today with fossil fuels coming from other regions. So, and still we need 20 million tons. So we expect from those 20 million tons that 80 million tons then needs to be imported. And this can be done from regions where solar power is cheap, that you can transfer it into hydrogen and then ship it towards, for example, the port of Rotterdam. And 2 million tons is what we expect to present then locally. And for that 2 million tons, we need around 20 to 25 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity. So that's significant. And I will also tell a little bit more on it a little bit later in this presentation. And if we focus on the demand side, we expect around 7 million tons then used in the Netherlands and around 30 million tons in the rest of Northwestern Europe, including Germany. So if we then move towards the hydrogen valley in the port of Rotterdam, so how we are going to make that vision a reality. So the first step for us is to make sure that there is infrastructure. So we believe that a new pipeline should be in place, an open access backbone throughout the whole port. But as I said in the beginning, 95% of the energy flows now are not really in the port of Rotterdam, but going towards Germany. We don't see that ending at the end of the port of Rotterdam, but it is also going towards North Rhine-Westphalia and to Gemmeland. And this pipeline then will connect the different sources of hydrogen and the different users in the port area and in the other parts of Northwestern Europe. So on the left-hand side, you see basically the different sources of hydrogen that we expect. And the first step for us is to decarbonize the existing industry. So the 500,000 tons of hydrogen that is produced each year. We can easily capture this CO2 and store that in empty gas field in the North Sea. So this is done by the Portals project, which you see on the left-hand side. And we also see opportunities to decarbonize the waste gases that we have in this area even further. So another blue hydrogen project called H-Vision, somewhere in the middle of this picture, is something that we work on to decarbonize also the waste gases. And then the second option that we see is hydrogen import. So in the end, around 80 million tons is what we expect. And we have different company or projects backed up in there. We see different forms and different streams of the hydrogen import then coming to the port of Rotterdam. So one of the ways that we see is the liquid hydrogen. Others is ammonia and liquid organic hydrogen carriers. So it depends really on the different countries and the different projects that we work on, what the best and efficient way is to do that. So this is really in the feasibility phase, and we are working on getting that done. And the third option is then offshore wind, connecting to a conversion park, which you see on the left-hand side and the bottom side of the port of Rotterdam. And I'm also going to tell a little bit more on that in the future, or sorry, in the next slides. It's really connecting large projects with offshore wind in a conversion park, so a central place where different large-scale projects can be placed into and connect on the infrastructure in order to grow further. So then the hydrogen will be transferred via the backbone, and we see then the different off-takers in this area. So one is the existing industry, where we see an increasing need of hydrogen, but also new industry that wants to build up on green hydrogen and green electricity. And also we see it in the heavy mobility industry, where an increasing demand of hydrogen will come. So a few examples are high trucks for the trucks, the inland navigation, the Rhine project, but we also see activities going on in seagoing vessels and aviation. And the last one, especially in the production of synthetic fuels and synthetic kerosene. So to put that a bit in the timeline, in 2023, the first project wants to be operational. So that's the backbone and the conversion park. And that's needed for the first project, the first electrolyzer that wants to be operational. So this is the Shell electrolyzer, 200 megawatt. In 2025, we see another electrolyzer going online, which is the H250 project with BP and Nourion, 250 megawatt. In 2025, around 500 hydrogen powered trucks via the Hydrox project, and we see already that number is increasing. In 2026, the H-Vision project, and in 2030, we see that the import terminal, the activity over there needs to grow, and also the infrastructure towards North Rhine-Westphalia. So now let's zoom in a little bit on the green hydrogen production side, because what I said in the beginning, we see that really happening in a central place in this area. And the reason for that is because of two reasons. The first one is that in 2016, we did a study with all the industry in this area to see how can we decarbonize and how can we reduce the CO2 emissions to almost zero. We saw that green hydrogen was a significant element in there. And in order to do that, basically the companies have two options. The first one is that you bring the electricity to the companies by cables, or you bring the hydrogen to the companies because they need hydrogen, and then you can use pipelines for that. So in the first case, what we did together with the TSO and the DSO, we investigated how can we make the infrastructure ready for those kinds of scenarios. And if we are going to use the pipelines, the cables, we saw that we need 48 meters in wide in order to get it from the North Sea towards the factories in this area. And in that case, we need to ask companies to leave the port of Rotterdam because we need to get some cables in place, which is of course not the purpose of what we want to do. The other option that we had is producing it somewhere on the border of the port of Rotterdam, where the offshore wind then enters the port and can convert it into hydrogen. and then transferred by a pipeline to the companies. And in that case, we only need less than 6 meters of height in order to bring the cables and or to bring the pipelines. And this is something that we can fit into this area. And another reason that we are focusing on a central place is that what we see is that the technology is scaling up. So the projects that we work on is in the scale of 100, 200, 250 megawatt. But for the region here, you really need to go to gigawatt scale. And also this project wants to scale up further after this, the first 200 megawatt. So we have done, so we work on a central place called the conversion park. What you see on the picture on the right-hand side. So you see basically 4 factories in this conversion park, where the companies can plug in, and the infrastructure. So the 2 gigawatt, 1 to 2 gigawatts offshore wind will be there. The backbone will be there, so they can plug in and scale up the technology, and the infrastructure is then already there. Another reason that we say, well, this is interesting because we need to go to 1-2 gigawatt is that 25% of the energy that is put into those factories comes out as heat. So if you are looking to the small scale technology, the heat that will come out of it is not really something that you can use. But in the scale of 1 to 2 gigawatt, you can use the heat, and especially in regions like the Port of Rotterdam. And therefore, we see it really as a system integration piece, not only about electricity and hydrogen. We also want to make use of the other waste streams that such a factory has, like heat and oxygen. So this is the conversion park concept. What you see over here is 1 to 2 gigawatt. The first companies that wants to be operational is the Shell electrolyzer of 200 megawatts and the 250 megawatt electrolyzer of BP Nourion in the H250 project. But that's still 1 to 2 gigawatt. So if you then take the data from the current projects that we have, so the Roland South, which is the first offshore wind farm that will be connected with the port, and also from the latest study that we have done with ISPT, we see that for this wind farm, for 1 gigawatt, you need around 17,000 hectares on the North Sea. On land, so in the port of Rotterdam, you then need a conversion station in order to transfer the offshore wind power to the power that you need, that you can handle on the high voltage grid, and that requires around 5.5 hectares. And if you then move to the electrolyzer, you need around, for 1 gigawatt, around 17 hectares. And this 17 hectares then produces 80,000 tons per annum. And from the vision that you saw in the beginning, we expect around 2 million tons per annum. You need to multiply these numbers by 25, meaning that you need in the port, the space that you need in the port is around 140 hectares for the conversion stations and 425 hectares for the electrolyzers. And if you add it up, you'll see that around 60% then is filled on the Maasvlakte, which is the edge of the Port of Rotterdam, only with conversion stations and with electrolyzers. So we have to work on that because that will not fit. You also need space for the other activities where a port is for. So we expect that part will be produced in the Port of Rotterdam itself. Part will be maybe already converted on the North Sea, but the 2 million tons is something that we can produce at least very close to the Port of Rotterdam. But where I started with, and this is my last slide, the 2 million tons is just 10% of the vision. So that's the reason also that we believe that importing from regions like what you see on the map here, where you have cheap solar power that you can convert into hydrogen and then ship towards the northwestern part of Europe, so Rotterdam, but also the other ports. We definitely see that this is needed and that Europe also, when we are moving towards 2050, will still be an importing continent. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Randolf, for that detailed presentation. I'm always struck by the practical realities. There's hundreds of hectares of space required. And when we're talking about ports and facilities, where is that space to be found? If that was easily available, then it would not be a problem. But often, especially in the case of the Netherlands, I assume land and terrain is a real question that has to be addressed. And so I appreciate that comment. We've been getting a series of questions coming in, and we'll go back and address those over time. But maybe one question that I would have just before we go back to Markus. Markus has been able to join us. Is the connections with other ports and other port activities that are going on. I'm just wondering, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Jacob from Port of LA later, but I'm wondering your connections, both we hear about the transport from Portugal to the Netherlands and other activities. I'm wondering, is there kind of a informal or formal network that's being developed of ports talking about hydrogen?
Well, I think now a formal one, not yet. Informal it is, because we see, there is no need for an import terminal if there is no exporting terminal. So basically what we see is that we are in discussion with several countries and ports in order to see how can we develop such a value chain from exporting to importing. So what you see indeed is that informally this is happening, definitely. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Technology has been addressed, and so Markus has been able to join us. So Markus, I'd like to ask you to turn on your video and things. That's great. And Randolf, you can turn yours off for now, and you'll be back joining us in the Q&A session later. So that's great. I really appreciate that. So Markus, I'd like to introduce you. Markus Kaufmann is the Senior Project Manager at Roland Berger's Hamburg office, and it's a Competence Center for Civil Economics and Infrastructure. For the past 6 years, he's been working on the topics in the new hydrogen economy as part of Roland Berger's growing cross-functional expert team in the field. As we heard earlier from Patrick Child, under the mandate of the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, Markus currently is managing the team in charge of developing the Mission Innovation Hydrogen Valley platform, which will go live in January 2020. And as I mentioned, this forum today is a bit of a teaser for the rollout of that. So with that brief introduction, Markus, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I trust you all can hear me very well. First of all, thank you, Tim, for the kind introduction. And thank you to you, Tim, and Randolf, especially for your flexibility with the agenda. I also have to thank my wife, who let me borrow her laptop for this session, because that actually enabled me to sign on and join this webinar. But now let's jump to the topic at hand, which is hydrogen valleys. And as Patrick has mentioned in the beginning, and as we're also seeing from the speakers, it's really becoming a global phenomenon on how the hydrogen market is being developed from the bottom up through regional initiatives. And I want to take a look at what we have found out in our projects, kind of surveying and working with several dozens of hydrogen valleys around the globe, and then talk a little about the platform and what to expect. To briefly cover the background of the exercise, as Tim and Patrick have mentioned, under the framework of Mission Innovation, and specifically the Innovation Challenge number 8, Clean Hydrogen, with funding from the European Commission, the Commission being, or the EU being one of the 3 co-chairs of this IC8, Germany and Australia being the other 2. We are doing a project for the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking in Brussels to establish a global information sharing platform on the topic of hydrogen valleys. Why hydrogen valleys? Because the FCHJU, through the efforts of the past couple of years, has really defined hydrogen valleys and observed that hydrogen valleys are kind of becoming the next thing in the market development towards in the new hydrogen economy. So when we talk about hydrogen valleys, we mean just as you've just seen in Randolph's presentation, integrated and larger scale new hydrogen projects covering more and more of the value chain in one initiative or portfolio of projects. So in many cases, these are regions which have had individual demonstration projects, for instance, on mobility applications in the past, or a single electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen, and now they want to take the next step. They want to take it to the next level with an integrated value chain, sort of en route to a future rollout of the wider hydrogen economy. And as mentioned, the platform is already live. h2b.eu is the URL, and there's not much to see there. The full content will go live in January, as Tim has mentioned. We really want to serve two audiences with this exercise. One is other project developers who look for some inspiration, role models, ideas on how to overcome certain challenges. And the other is, of course, policymakers, other stakeholders in the general public who want to understand more about hydrogen valleys, what they're doing, what's making them successful, what's still holding them back, and what they can do to support them. So when we look at the global landscape of hydrogen valleys, it's, as I mentioned, fascinating to see that this is really caught on everywhere in the world, in all the traditional and also the new, I would say, lead markets of the new hydrogen economy. So this map shows you more than 30 valleys that we have worked with intensively over the past couple months in 15 countries. To name a few, we have the kind of, I'd say, maybe first generation of European hydrogen valleys where that term was coined. For instance, the Orkney Islands in Scotland, the Haven project in northern Netherlands, also the long ongoing activities in South Tyrol, in around Bolzano in Italy. You then have sort of a next generation of hydrogen projects, integrated hydrogen projects across Germany, France, Denmark, Spain, other parts of Europe. And then you also have sort of the IPHE projects, which are also framed as covering the entire value chain. So this is sort of the European landscape. But then, as you can see, you see now projects in China, in Japan, in Australia. You know, many of you will be aware of the nearly 30 gigawatt of announced green hydrogen projects we have in Australia. Some of those are actually hydrogen valleys as well, with a more integrated sort of value chain coverage. And then in the US and in Chile, and also in other parts where we're still reaching out to valley developers, you see basically a similar thing, which is these next generation integrated value chain projects. We've done a survey of the projects you can see here, collected a lot of data, done a lot of interviews, and as I mentioned, the point of the platform will be to share that information, to allow others to learn and to support what's going on. So I wanted to share a few highlights of what we found when analyzing what's going on in a more bigger picture sense, I think. First topic is sort of the value chain coverage. So almost all valleys want to produce clean hydrogen. So clean hydrogen production and supply is typically at the center of the valleys, and more than 80% want to produce green hydrogen through water electrolysis. You see PEM technology a bit more often than alkaline. However, I should mention, the larger the projects are, the more prevalent alkaline becomes, which may reflect the higher maturity in industrial production capacities, at least today, and the short term for that technology. But additionally, I think it's also remarkable that storage and transport is such an integral part as well, with more than 80% and 75% respectively saying we also want to have dedicated storage and transport assets in our project. The Majority of the valleys is still, the vast majority is still mobility driven. Why is that? I think there's several reasons. I think a lot of them have actually done demonstration projects on hydrogen mobility in the past, and want to take that to the next level. Several valleys also told us, or a lot of them actually told us, hydrogen mobility is a strong showcase element for the new hydrogen economy. You see vehicles driving around, you can experience it, and that's important. And last but not least, many also said, well, in mobility that's where we have the best business case today, and the highest willingness to pay for clean hydrogen applications, basically. So I should also say, though, and that's important as well, more than half of the valleys also want to serve industrial end users, which will likely be in a larger sense the big volume of takers that will really get the clean hydrogen market going. We'll look at the drivers in more detail on the next slide. The project sizes are very, very diverse. The smallest project we have plans to invest around 20 million, the largest more than 5 billion. And this, I think, shows also for many reasons, for everyone around the world who's looking at this and saying, okay, this is something we can do in our region, that it's well possible to do such an integrated project at a smaller or at a very large scale. It really depends on what your assets are in a region and what you want to accomplish. More than, on average, sort of each of these valleys is developed and driven by more than 10 stakeholders at the same time. So everywhere you have larger, strong partnerships of stakeholders from the private sector, the public sector, research and academia coming together to get those projects off the ground. In more than half of the valleys today, private enterprises take the clear lead as a project developer, which I think is also a sign of an overall maturing market. When you look at, and I think this is especially interesting from a policy perspective, what's behind the valleys, what's motivating developers to design and implement those projects, I'd say the main motivating factors can be factors into three different buckets. Sort of economic drivers, which I think is quite interesting because we're in this project we've been discussing much more about project economics, positive business cases, etc., than I think would have been the case 5 years ago. So many valleys say, well, actually we have a business case with certain funding support, or maybe even in some cases even without it, the project economics makes sense. Yeah, we want to develop new business and make money at the end of the day. In other cases, industrial policy is a key driver, and actually this is almost as relevant today as the sort of decarbonization climate policy drivers are. So value creation, future employment, changing or sort of transforming a local economy from a fossil fuel-based, maybe natural gas-based economy to a clean energy future economy with the same and even more local value creation and employment. Those are important drivers as well. In some cases, it's actually the pure exploitation of a strong regional asset. For instance, low-cost renewables and making the most out of those with green hydrogen production, or a particular geological storage asset that, where a valley says we want to put hydrogen storage as a service in a larger scale at the center. The environmental drivers, of course, are still leading overall. If you ask the valleys, why are you doing this? The decarbonization agenda, climate policy, also reducing local emission, NOx, noise emissions, for instance, in public transport, is a key driver, and thereby improving the overall quality of living. And then, as I said before, there are some more, I call them social motivators, where you can see it's about showcasing hydrogen in use, allowing people to get a sense of the look and feel, driving social acceptance, because it's important to achieve that en route to a wider use of hydrogen in different sectors. We then also looked at what the challenges are that developers face, and we have data here that focuses more on the sort of project development earlier stage phase and more on the actual financing phase. And I think what's quite striking, at least for me, was when to see that technology readiness is actually not the top issue anymore, and less than half of the valleys say, okay, well, we have doubts about the technological readiness. I think that's also a sign that we're not really talking about that so much anymore, but rather about business questions, funding, the underlying business case, risk sharing mechanisms, building a commercial structure that works. So that's more important. And I think that this then also translates into the challenges you see on the financing side. Yes, getting public funding support is still a big topic because there is a funding gap for most projects. But then it's really about typical commercial de-risking exercises to enable financing of a project, which is securing offtake commitments to de-risk the commercial model. So binding commitments from hydrogen off-takers to purchase clean hydrogen, securing private investments, building a financial model, etc. So I think this is overall just a sign, as mentioned before, that the market is maturing. Another key topic we asked and we analyzed is what role does regulation play in policymaking in terms of helping these valleys develop, creating an environment where they can be successful projects. And here, the top issues that come up are related to permitting, which I think is just important to note. It's about experience on permitting authority side, doubts that permits will be available in time, even missing permitting procedures because there's doubts that they are even in place for a hydrogen project. And then we also turn it around and ask the valleys, well, what are the key regulatory provisions that would help you and make your project successful? And I've just collected a few quotes on the right-hand side of the slides, where you have sort of more demand-side elements that help the competitiveness of clean hydrogen, CO2 taxation, the Renewable Energy Directive as an example from Europe for ultimately the clean fuel sector, the Clean Vehicle Directive for public transport, but then carbon contracts for difference being another one, but then you also have more sort of supply and project implementation supporting regulation, like exemptions of green electricity from surcharges, grid fees, etc., and of course the wider strategies that governments have put in place, where valleys also say, well, if hydrogen valleys are clearly at the center of those strategies, then this will give us a great political boost and support in developing our projects. So to close, I want to say we didn't only look, of course, at challenges, and demands and wish lists from project developers, what they want, but we also will highlight a few, we think, sort of best practices or good practices that we observe, and I think things we can take note of that are quite impressive. So it's really fascinating to see how regions have successfully built on successive projects over the past 10, sometimes 15 years, starting small, now growing bigger and more ambitious, taking on more complexity, more scale to develop a local hydrogen value chain, and how you can really see how one step successively follows the other. We also learned a lot about effective governance, project management of complex partnerships, many stakeholders who try to accomplish the same thing. Also, how, especially in Europe, project developers have very creatively tapped into different public funding sources at EU level, at national level, but also at regional or state level, because they actually see, for instance, in their projects, the different policy agendas and funding priorities of different ministries or agencies converging and being able to leverage many of them in one project. We found a valley that was, like I mentioned before, the fourth point here is de-risking, commercial de-riskment is possible, is feasible today already to find off-takers willing to commit to long-term agreements to allow for the demand side to be de-risked. And last but not least, we actually found a valley that managed to purely project finance their project on a limited recourse basis, which typically is a very strong sign of a mature energy infrastructure project. I think I've already talked for too long, so I'm gonna finish just with a last slide, reiterating what Tim already said. This was just a teaser. The platform will go live with a launch event by the FCHJU on the 15th of January. I hope to see many of you there. And as I said, I hope this is going to be a really valuable source of information for developers and policymakers alike. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Markus, for that summary and for the teaser going forward. I did have a few. Well, we're getting lots of questions coming in, which is great. And I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions on things, and then we'll go through the other presentations. Then we'll have a longer time for Q&As. So I'd ask people to please submit your questions and who you'd like to ask them to. We're building up a little bit of a roster of the questions. A couple of points that I wanted just to flag or question on relates to, well, two things. One is on the technical side, it appears that a lot of the valleys are looking to generate the hydrogen themselves, electrolyzers using clean, renewable sources and things. I'm wondering if you have examples or if there are cases where byproduct or waste hydrogen is also being considered in some of these valleys as a unique, you were saying, a unique characteristic. Are there some that might be drawing upon other industrial facilities that have the hydrogen, and so they're saying, how can we capture that and build? So kind of an industrial strategy. So were there some of those cases coming along yet? And then maybe my other question, and you can cover this as well, is around social acceptance and communications out to the community. We often within our Kabul, our group, we're looking at the economics, the technical, the policy drivers and things. Are some of the valleys, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the outreach and social acceptance that are starting to develop, or what the thinking is around that for some of the valleys. So if you could, a little bit on the other sources of hydrogen, and then the engagement on the social side.
Sure. So the other sources of hydrogen, I'm just checking the data, because as I said, it's a lot of valleys, it's a lot of data points. The short answer is yes, we do see those valleys. We do see those valleys where basically you have a waste hydrogen, byproduct hydrogen, unique opportunities for blue hydrogen production as well, because there's locally socially accepted CCUS opportunities, big natural gas supply, and blue hydrogen is the way to go. So, which I consider though, and I don't want to start a debate on that here though, as part of the clean hydrogen bucket that I framed. So the short answer is yes. I think it always depends. Then in the cases that I'm aware of, the industrial players producing the waste hydrogen are then oftentimes the driver, teaming up with essentially off-takers and consumers that can use it directly. For instance, in Germany, in some of the sort of regions that have been leading the market, it's been common practice that byproduct hydrogen is used for fueling hydrogen buses in municipal transport, for instance. So yes, that does exist. However, I'd say the most common model, just numerically speaking, is green hydrogen from dedicated renewables locally. That's just what it is if I look at the data. The second question in terms of social acceptance. Let me ask that question back. What can you tell me again? What specifically you were asking for? Because as I said, in many valleys this is a clear element. That's why you see so much mobility out there. Even though the conventional wisdom is on the larger market scale, we have to go for decarbonizing big industrial off-takers. There are the volumes for project developers, but also from a decarbonization perspective. So what we really see is a focus on mobility still, because especially mobility segments like heavy duty applications, buses, trucks, trains, where you have this look and feel element. People experience hydrogen firsthand in their daily lives. They see it driving around basically. So that's the idea behind it, and that also what gets the buy-in from different people. It's nothing that is, let's say, where thousands of tons, which are more, let's say, abstract, ends up in a refinery. Yeah, which is from a climate policy point of view, of course, much more impactful, but has not that specific social element. And then I think the other point I want to make on the social acceptance part, I think the importance of that dimension is also reflected by the broad stakeholder communities and project partnerships you see. So we have projects with more than 90 partners here on this map, from let's say local and regional authorities and governments, from NGOs, from universities, research institutes and academia, private businesses. We have actually projects in here in northern Germany focused on, based on wind power, where the idea where you have kind of citizen wind farms. So wind farms where citizens are invested with their own money into the upstream renewables are part of the Hydrogen Valley to increase local acceptance and participation. So I think in those would be the two dimensions I would highlight: sort of the look and feel, seeing it around you, and secondly, this idea of really broad stakeholder coalitions that include all elements of society.
That's great. That captured what I was wondering about, is that engaging, using transportation as a mechanism as a communication tool, and the broader conversations within the community as well as hydrogen comes into play. So that's great. So thank you very much for this, Markus, and you will be staying with us, and we are getting a number of questions for you. So we'll come back to you after we've gone through the other presentations and open up the segment for the Q&A. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll see you again shortly.
I'll stick around.
That's great. Thanks. So next on our presentation list is Jacob Goldberg. Jacob is the environmental specialist at the Port of Los Angeles Environmental Management Division. As part of the air quality team, Jacob is the project manager for Tech Advancement Program. He is currently managing several pilot demonstration projects, including the demonstration of hydrogen fuel cell electric dredge trucks and testing of wireless charging systems for heavy-duty yard trucks. And so with that, I'd like to pass the floor over to you, Jacob, another unique example of what the drivers are that are moving forward on the Hydrogen Valley concept. So, Jacob, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tim. And yeah, I want to thank you and Markus for an excellent transition into my presentation, talking about the social drivers behind some of these hydrogen valleys. That'll help me get into a little bit about our background on our project and kind of go from there. So thank you, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it may be for you. And thank you to the team putting this together for having me on to discuss our shore-to-store hydrogen project here at the Port of Los Angeles. A little bit of background about the Port of LA, who we are. We were founded in 1907 as part of the City of Los Angeles, so we're a part of the local municipal government. We function as a landlord business model for a port authority, meaning that the port authority itself does not handle or control any of the goods movement or business operations that happen at our facilities. Rather, we lease the property to our operating tenants. Statistics on the actual size of the port are on the screen there. We're roughly comparable as a port complex between the Port of Los Angeles and our neighboring Port of Long Beach to the Port of Rotterdam, who spoke earlier. We're the largest container port in the Western Hemisphere, and a lot of the bulk of the project that we're discussing today is focused on containerized goods. So perhaps one of the more unique drivers in our project is one that hasn't been touched along too much here, which is local health concerns and pollution in the local community. So the map you see here showcases the Southern California region, where the Port of Los Angeles is at the kind of southern extreme of the red oval you can see on the screen. And following those red and yellow orange patterns up the north into the greater Los Angeles region are the main goods movement highways, where freight cargo leaves the ports and heads to the greater region. Roughly 45% of all containerized goods coming into the United States come in through the Southern California Gateway, either Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Long Beach, and that leads to dangerous levels of particulate matter and nitrous oxides in the region, which disproportionately hits these disadvantaged minority and low-income communities in our region. These impacts pressured and culminated in the publishing of the Clean Air Action Plan. This document was originally published in 2006, again in partnership with our neighboring Port of Long Beach. It was most recently updated in 2017. And this document came together from a wide-ranging stakeholder outreach process involving the local community, industry, and various regulatory agencies as well. The document it outlines a series of strategies and goals for reducing air emissions from port operations. And as updated in 2017, there are three primary goals that kind of led to the project we're discussing today. The first is that all the container handling equipment at the docks to be operating by zero emissions at the tailpipe of those vehicles by 2030. For the on-road trucking elements, the drayage trucks, as they're known, to be operating again on zero emissions at the tailpipe by 2035, and an overall climate impact goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. So again, I manage our technology advancement program, which was originally established under this Clean Air Action Plan. We've been doing a wide variety of clean technology demonstrations since 2008 on ships, trains, hovercraft, including tugboats, that kind of thing, and of course the on-road trucks, which is the focus of our hydrogen project today. So the project under discussion is, we call it our Shore to Store project. It's a publicly funded and privately funded project with a total value of roughly 83 million US dollars, 41 million of which was funded by the California Air Resources Board. And this project is looking at the potential for hydrogen to decarbonize the greater goods movement supply chain throughout our region, with a focus on longer distance and heavier duty trucking, and then the regional infrastructure needs to support the greater transition to cleaner and eventually fully decarbonize the port. The project itself will demonstrate 10 hydrogen Class 8 heavy-duty drayage trucks. These trucks are being manufactured by Kenworth Motors, the third largest heavy-duty truck manufacturer in the United States, in partnership with Toyota, who's building the powertrain for these 10 vehicles. Alongside those 10 trucks, we'll be developing 2 heavy-duty hydrogen fueling stations in the region, one near the port in Wilmington, California, a second one at the northern extreme of that red oval from the previous map, which is this kind of warehouse and rail yard district in what's known as the Inland Empire region of Southern California. Specifically, the subcity is known as Ontario, California. These stations are being built by Shell, and that will combine with a third station that Shell is building near the Port of Long Beach to begin building this, again, hydrogen infrastructure network that would be needed to support on-road trucking as it moves towards cleaner operations. So here's an image of 3 of those trucks that I just discussed that are in their final stages of manufacture before they begin their services here in Southern California. The first truck is actually scheduled to begin its deployment next week and has been delivered to Toyota here in Southern California for its final shakedown and reliability testing before delivery to our fleet partner for operations. So we're very excited to actually see this truck in operation in our region. And that builds back to that kind of social acceptance discussion that Markus and Tim were just having about getting these trucks into the hands of our drivers specifically, letting them know how see them in action, see them on the road every day, and see the reliability behind their operations in comparison to their diesel counterparts. These trucks are expected to get approximately 350 miles or so of fully loaded operations before needing to refuel, and have a targeted refueling time of roughly 25 minutes or so, which is very comparable to their diesel counterparts. Here's an image of one of the Shell stations. This one is the station that is mechanically complete in Ontario, California. It has already undergone a fueling test on a light-duty vehicle and is expected to test fuel a heavy-duty vehicle next week in preparation for full opening for services later this month. These stations are a very key piece of the overall Hydrogen Valley concept we're discussing today, beginning to develop the regional infrastructure needed to support not just on-road trucking, but other utilization in the region. These stations will be available for use for light-duty vehicles as well as other heavy-duty vehicles in the region. And you can see in the image here that this one is built at a major truck stop in that greater warehousing region where trucks go to refuel already on a regular basis. And we're looking to continue to expand that network in the future. So looking forward, the full demonstration is expected to be completely underway by April of 2021. We're looking for a full year of data collection on this specific project. But in the interim time and looking forward beyond that, we are continuing to work with our local partners to expand near-term demonstrations throughout the port complex, as well as across the greater region, expanding on the Shell station model and future drayage operations, and then back at the port docks themselves, looking at terminal equipment, hovercraft, and so on. There's a few specific state public funding opportunities that have recently come out or been closed for application. The California Air Resources Board, in partnership with the California Energy Commission, has just released a large-scale drayage truck and infrastructure pilot grant that's looking to deploy 50 or more zero-emission drayage trucks at one facility, and we're looking at that with our local partners. Additionally, the California Energy Commission recently closed for application a grant for hydrogen rail and marine applications, looking at either switching locomotives and freight utilization or commercial hovercraft. And we were partnered to several applications on that, looking for feasibility designs of the commercial hovercraft as well as the infrastructure side and the abilities to expand thereon. So with that, I'll wrap up my presentation here and look forward to future questions and the conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jacob, for that summary. And I do appreciate very much the issue around the user community. And this is something that you did raise here. And again, in the background, I always have this kind of concern around, so I call it social acceptance, but it's the general use kind of factors. And it's great to see that is a key component of the thinking that's going into the development of your project initially. And hopefully that will be part of the communication that goes out as well. I understand that using the electric vehicles, the fuel cell hydrogen vehicles, is you don't get the smell and the vibrations, those kinds of things. So there's some characteristics that the drivers are liking. They have concerns as well, I'm sure. But so that was great to flag that. And also your reference to the infrastructure that's being put in place and the opportunity for the build out of using that infrastructure for other things. So that's very important. So thank you very much for that. So I too want to thank you, and then we'll come back with we are getting questions for you as well. So we'll come back to you after the last two presentations. So thank you very much. Next up, we have Neil Kermode. Neil is the Managing Director of the European Marine Energy Centre since 2005 and has overseen the deployment of more marine energy technology in the seas around Orkney than has been deployed in any other site around the world. Very interesting. Prior to working at the European Marine Energy Centre, Neil worked as a project developer of a tidal scheme following 6 years of work at the Environmental Agency dealing with regulations and development issues. Neil's a chartered engineer, fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and a chartered environmentalist. And with that, Neil, please, you have the floor.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. And thanks very much indeed to IPHE for the opportunity to talk to you today. I feel slightly dwarfed by the scale of the previous two presentations, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what Orkney is doing as we are a small community at the edge. I've called it pushing at the edge because quite a lot of what we're doing is pushing at some of the regulatory and financial aspects. So if you know where Orkney, we didn't know where Orkney is, you do now. And if you think of us, we often think of us in terms of the scenery and the archaeology. What you often don't think of us is as about the innovation which is going on here. The slide in the top right-hand corner is the largest tidal turbine in the world at 2 megawatts. We have low energy housing going in. Bottom left-hand corner is the electrolyzer that ITM first provided us with. And then we also have a number of innovations going on around vessels. So we're a community that tries and innovates and tries to find its way to its new future. So why are we looking at hydrogen? Well, in part, it's because of the position we find ourselves in with the energy system that operates in the UK. This is a picture very quickly of the UK electricity demand in the grey line. The green line is what was being produced during the month of August from renewables. And you see there's a spiky element, which is photovoltaics, and there's a curvy bit, there's a waveform, which is wind. And if we look at what would happen if we put a lot more renewables into the network, if you quadruple the amount of renewables that were on the network, you would get something like this. And in fact, this is the UK. What we see in Orkney today is this. So we're already in a position where we have an energy system which is already dominated by renewables. So we realized that we had some view of where the future was going to be as more and more renewables had rolled onto the network. And this gives us problems because you can see the renewable line, which is the red one, is above the blue for a lot of the time, but there are periods when it isn't. So how are we going to store? What are we going to do with the surfeit of energy that's there? You know, all these questions which we all know everybody's having to grapple with. So we decided to look at this in some detail. And an audit was undertaken of energy in Orkney, and it really shows the fuels of the slab in the middle section going down from kerosene. The electricity is the large purple block in the middle. And you can see as you go to the right-hand side where we use our energy. And most of it is heat and light, but transport is a big piece. And I think it was Markus who mentioned about the importance of mobility. And this is what led us to trying to find a way to deal with the inadequacies of our local grid. And that led us towards working with hydrogen. And so we are taking tidal energy, or having taken tidal energy, turning it into hydrogen as a means to get around the grid restrictions that we face at the moment. So I'm going to talk to you about two particular areas that we've been working on that I thought would be of interest to this conference. And those are the areas that are boxed. The lower green box is about ferry services, and the upper green box is about flights, because we're doing some work with aviation. So turning first of all to the item about the ferries. So we started off from a position where we're producing tidal energy. We couldn't get it all off the island because the cables were too small for doing it. And so what we sought to do was to start to produce hydrogen initially from the tidal energy that we couldn't export otherwise. So we put in the electrolyzer, and the bottom right-hand corner shows the corner of half a ton of hydrogen storage. But very quickly, we patched in together with Community Energy Scotland and the local community who owned the wind turbine in the background, and came up with a scheme initially called the Surf and Turf Project. And that was then expanded, as was mentioned earlier, into a project called the Big Hit Project, which looked to use hydrogen in a variety of ways by engaging the community and using their assets. And so we decided we were going to look first and foremost about whether we could use hydrogen in shipping. And that was one of the main areas that is important to us, because the 9 vessels that serve the island archipelago, between them use around about 3 million litres of gas oil a year. So was there something we could do? And so we started our journey by us making hydrogen to start with. We had to transport it somewhere on ships and then use it. And the initial plan was we were going to use the hydrogen and turn it back into electricity when the tides stopped, in other words, fill in the gaps between the generating peaks. But we very quickly found, as a result of some work done for us by Element Energy through Exodus, that in fact, in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there the circle is showing that hydrogen was worth around 30 pence a kilogram if we turned it back into electricity. It was worth £4.60 if we turned it into propulsion fuels. So in other words, it's worth 15 times as much if you used it to move things. And so that led us very much to the projects we were looking at where we're working with ferries. It's an economic thing. It's a most value thing. And so we're working a number of projects, the Surf and Turf one, Big Hit, as I mentioned, which also introduced vans and boilers, and there isn't time to go into the details of it now. And more recently, we've been working on another project about using hydrogen for auxiliary power afloat in a vessel. And that one is in italics because one of the challenges we're having is over some of the regulatory issues around using hydrogen afloat. Not because the regulations don't or the regulations prevent it, they just don't necessarily permit it. This is a complicated diagram which came out of the UK Green Maritime Plan, and very quickly to say that we're starting on the left-hand side with renewables and we're trying to get over to the right-hand side with electric propulsion system, and you have to follow a fairly circuitous route of making electricity, turning into a fuel, storing it, putting it into fuel cells, and a variety of different ways. But there's one piece I think is often omitted, and that's the section at the top, which is the alternatives that you can make with hydrogen and making methanol or ammonia. And these are areas of great interest to us because we're seeing some of the logistical challenges that we'll have if we just handle pure hydrogen, and particularly in the shipping environment. So we're very keen to work on areas which are looking at some of these other areas as well, because I think it was well illustrated in the Mare Green project, which was really about inland shipping, but it showed there are different ways in which you get fuel onto a ship. The diagram on the left shows you either bring it in by bringing a small ship alongside and pump fuel in, you bring it in by a truck and put it onto the ship, or you pipe it in from some store on shore. And there are a variety of mechanisms, but the issue is that this whole area of the handling of fuels is something that needs considerable effort. And at the moment, we think there are still some gaps in the whole process. It was interesting noticing, however, that the industry is really, as we see it, just interpreting what Wasilla have said here, that frankly, they don't care what these ships are going to run on, they'll make whatever it takes. So I think we're seeing that industry is muscling up and being ready to make this all work. So returning to the second one of the upper of the two boxes, the off-island flights, I said we're also working on other things because there are other major mechanism of transportation here in the islands is that around aviation. Now we have got fairly small planes here, they're turboprop planes, but we used to have, you remember the days when we used to travel? Well, we used to do this thing, 180,000 passengers a year and producing nearly 7,000 tons of CO2. So we've been looking at projects, and I'm pleased to say we've very successfully been working with a company called Zero Avia, who have now successfully demonstrated a hydrogen fuel cell running on an electric drivetrain on an aircraft, and we've been supplying the hydrogen into that project. And in due course, that'll be green hydrogen that will be working right the way through the whole aviation chain. We hope once again to do a demonstration flight around Orkney, but we honestly see that this is a mechanism that is going to fill the aviation need for us in this community. So in effect, what we're saying is that what we've been doing so far is, although it's not of the scale that Rotterdam or Los Angeles are looking at, we're coming at it from a small end, and it's a practical small scale application. And what we're doing is learning by doing. We think we are creating actual pre-commercial knowledge through the tasks that we're going through and some of the challenges we're facing. And we're seeking to get to the point of practical demonstration. But as I said before, it's often the regulatory restrictions, which mean that some things are harder than we might hope. And I think this is one of the key parts as regulators, that we need to recognise that there are often regulations put in place that are designed to do one thing, and then some years later we find they don't permit something else that was never intended at the start. But we do genuinely believe that the efforts that we're putting in at the moment are making some progress on making our contribution towards net zero. And we think we're doing that at the moment on land, sea and air. The one thing that we are really keen to try and find if we can expand on is really in the agricultural space as well, because as an agricultural community, we particularly have a large diesel bill for these sorts of things. So if anybody out there has got a plan, or if anybody has got a particular hydrogen tractor or a combine, please do contact me afterwards. I'd be delighted to speak to you. That's all I wanted to say, really, Tim. I'm very happy to take questions, and I hope I've left enough time for it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Neil. That's a great summary, and I appreciate the opportunistic behavior. You're really trying to take advantage of things, and hydrogen is playing a key role in being able to do that in a unique environment. And I could just say one of the questions that has come in is if you're planning, I think it was, are you planning to do some hydrogen tourism oriented events. Once things get back up and going, we'll exactly. Okay, so great. Thank you very much for that presentation, Neil. So I'd like to move on to our fourth presentation of a Hydrogen Valleys concept today, and by introducing Neil Smith. Neil is the Executive Director of the Growth and Low Carbon Division within the Department of Energy and Mining in the state of South Australia. He leads the teams responsible for capturing the growth and economic value associated with South Australia's world-leading renewable, mineral, and energy resources. Nick is the Vice President of the International Association for Hydrogen Safety, HySafe, and a member of the Future Fuels Cooperative Research Center's Research Advisory Committee. And with that, Nick, please, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Tim. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all, even if it is a very early hour in the morning here in Australia. It's been a really interesting presentation, was a group of presentations so far, and I guess it's quite a diverse group we've seen so far, and I think hopefully we will be able to sort of explain our place in the world a little bit more as well. So for those of you who aren't aware, South Australia's the little highlighted, the lighter blue box in the middle of Australia down the bottom there, and we're about 1 million square kilometres. So if you think about that from a European perspective, it's about the size of France and Spain combined. So an important part of our culture in Australia is the Department for Energy and Mining acknowledges the Aboriginal people as the first people of South Australia, and we recognise and respect the cultural connections as the traditional owners and occupants of the land and waters of South Australia, and that they continue to make a unique and irreplaceable contribution to the state. And I think that that's a really important place to start our presentation. So not long ago, I was sitting down with Mark Twiddle, who's the Director of Energy for Tesla in Australia, and he made the comment, and it sort of stuck with us, and sort of South Australia is a window to the future for energy system transformation. We're really, really very fortunate. What you see here is an overlay of solar irradiation in Australia and wind speeds above 7.3 metres per second. So the lighter yellow is the 20.5 megajoules a square metre DNI, and the darker yellow is the DNI of 23.5 megajoules a square metre. What you can see there is that South Australia, highlighted in the box, is very, very, very blessed with coincidental wind and solar, and it's quite unique in terms of that. We know what the solar profile is. It comes up in the morning and it goes through to the middle of the day. But what's unique about South Australia is that sort of mid-afternoon, the wind picks up and starts to run as the sun's tailing off, and it starts to run through until the early hours of the morning, and it produces a very, very highly efficient renewable platform to produce energy. And I guess we've been on this journey for 20 years now, or 15 probably more so. And South Australia in 2019, we were second only to Denmark in terms of the scale of renewable penetration in gigawatt scale networks, and they've just actually released, the Australian Energy Market Operators just released the renewable generation for 2019-20, and it's just around about 57% renewable penetration. So we have very high penetration, and we will be heading. Our commitment from the government is that we intend to be 100% net zero renewable energy by 2030. We're well on the way to that at the moment. And importantly, I guess we already have existing 2.8 gigawatts of renewables in place, and we've got a significant portfolio under development, nearly 13 gigawatts, or around $20 billion Australian, and really split evenly between solar and wind and storage, whether it be battery, pumped hydro, and those key sort of storages there. Importantly, Port Bonython, I want to talk about Port Bonython as a hydrogen hub today. We heard about the Port of Rotterdam and their challenges around space. Well, the Port Bonython site is an existing around about 1,800 hectare site. It currently has an existing refinery on there that Santos operate, and they take a feed from a liquids line that comes out of the Cooper Basin in the centre of Australia, runs down to Port Bonython, where they separate the liquids out, and they export predominantly crude and LPGs in terms of propane and butane from the existing site at Port Bonython. There's also obviously a berthing facility there. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries own a diesel import terminal there. Australia is not blessed with a significant amount of refining capacity. It's getting smaller and smaller as time goes on, and so most of our diesel and petrol is imported around Australia. And that's the case for South Australia, where exclusively imported fuel predominantly. Just around the corner is about 30 kilometres by road is the Liberty Group's Whyalla Steelworks, which is an integrated magnetite DRI blast furnace and rolling facility. It's fairly ageing, and the Sanjeev Gupta and his group have announced plans to transition that facility across to green steel, where they'll be installing an electric arc furnace, and they are talking about somewhere between a 400 and a gigawatt of electrolyzers required to provide them with the hydrogen to support their operations, along with renewable electricity from the region around there. Recently, the South Australian government released we undertook a bit of a landmark study, and we looked at hydrogen export modelling. We released a hydrogen export modelling tool. You can find that by going to hydrogen.sa.gov.au. But what it looked at was the renewable energy zones and the opportunities around South Australia, and found there are 4 key prospective areas, of which Port Bonython is one. There's one at My Pony Point on the opposite side. There's the Port of Adelaide, and then there's the greenfield site at Cape Hardy, Port Spencer. So when we talk about the scale of the Port Bonython renewable resources, we're talking somewhere between 1.5 and 6.5 gigawatts of renewables that can be installed in that fairly close area to support the operations of a future hydrogen hub. And we see that the liquid pipeline from the Cooper Basin, we've got Santos, who are heavily involved in the Cooper Basin, own the refinery there. They have been doing a significant amount of work at looking at carbon capture and underground storage in the Cooper Basin, and utilising that facility to then separate out the natural gas, pump it down to the facility at Port Bonython, and export the hydrogen. They've been doing feasibility studies in conjunction with Kawasaki Heavy Industries. And we already have H2U, who have announced that they're building a renewable hydrogen to ammonia plant in between Whyalla and Port Bonython, about 20 kilometres from Port Bonython. That's commencing. It's already got the front end engineering and design underway, which will commence with a 75 megawatt demonstrator project for the renewable hydrogen to ammonia, with plans to expand that to 1.5 gigawatts in time for export. The 75 megawatts will be for predominantly local use in terms of agricultural use of fertilisers, for explosives manufacturing for our mining industry, and for copper beneficiation and processing. So there's a strong domestic need for that. I guess probably really pleasing for the HTU project is that in a strong vote of confidence, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries have just announced that they'll be taking an equity stake in HTU to drive this project a little bit harder. So it's a particularly pleasing opportunity and acknowledgement of the work that's been done so far in terms of looking at the opportunities there. With Port Bonython, we've got a fairly old berth at the site there that needs to be considered in terms of infrastructure. We need to have a bit of a think about how we're going to manage the additional cargoes, and whether that's a new jetty that's been built for berthing, or whether you can utilise the existing and create a number of different berths off of that to support the additional loads that's something that we're looking at the moment. So I guess one of the biggest challenges that we're facing at the moment when building our hydrogen hub is, what is it? Do we build supply or do we need demand? And I guess that's been part of the key piece is working closely with international customers who will be the demand suppliers to help our project proponents get together and understand the opportunities there. We can, because we have such incredibly good renewable resources, we can do, we'll produce pretty much anything that people want in terms of hydrogen. If it's liquid hydrogen, we'll produce liquid hydrogen. If it's ammonia, then we'll produce ammonia. If it's MCH, we can do MCH. We're pretty much technology agnostic, and we have a natural competitive advantage in producing green hydrogen. Hydrogen export modelling tool has identified that we can produce green hydrogen for about $3.50 a kilogram at the moment, and blue hydrogen for about $2.50 a kilogram from the Port Bonython site. So it's a pretty prospective opportunity, given that the costs of electrolyzers are coming down rapidly still, and we have yet to get to scale. The land at Port Bonython is owned by the state, and so there's a process that we're going through at the moment to do a bit of a market sounding to understand what the demand for the land is there. And given that we're government, we tend to have open, transparent procurements around that side of things. The little map that you can see there with the outline in the centre of the slide here identifies the land that originally belongs to the Bangala people. That's their native area of where their people have always roamed. And so it's been fantastic to see the engagement from HTU in particular with the Bangala Aboriginal people, who are very forward-thinking and looking at the cultural history of their land and the opportunities to develop their workforce skills and for future generations. So it's been fantastic to see the engagement around that with the local Bangala people. If I just flick back to the previous slide, you can see on the if you have a look at the two pictures here on the right, showing the little icons there. There's a big sandy beach to the left of that area, which is it's actually the Australian giant cuttlefish breeding ground. So there's a big marine reserve there, and it has been that way for some time. Port Bonython was built in 1982, but it is a challenge to ensure that whatever we do in the future in terms of developing the hydrogen hub at Port Bonython doesn't have any impact on the giant cuttlefish breeding grounds. And you can see the giant cuttlefish down there in the bottom right. When they go breeding, they turn into these just amazing colours, and they're very unique to South Australia. So part of the challenges one of the additional challenges that we've sort of identified is the fact that if you're going to produce liquid hydrogen at hub, really in Australia, you need to sort of be within 800 metres of the berthing facility to ensure that you don't get boil off in pipes, and it can get particularly hot. We had one of our a little bit further north in South Australia, we had a heat wave the other day and had our hottest November day on record at 48 degrees, about 400 or 500 kilometres north of here. So it does get very hot, and those are some of the areas that we need to take into account as well. From a legislation and regulation side of things around hydrogen, we have already existing pretty strong, oil and gas regulations, and I guess some of the challenges are, how do we move forward to create flexible, transparent, certain legislation regulation that is flexible enough to capture, changes in technology in the future. Do we match it in with the existing regulations, or do we need to create new legislation? I think the answer's probably been, in January 2018, we pulled together a hydrogen regulatory working group in South Australia of all the agencies that will be responsible for permitting hydrogen. And so there's been a whole piece of work that's being done around what do we need to do to make our existing legislation more adaptable and more responsive to hydrogen. So that regulatory working group also sits there and works with proponents project proponents to talk about the project and work with them to understand what they're thinking, explain what the legal requirements are in terms of the legislative and regulatory requirements, to help them understand their initial design phase. So it's been a very successful piece of work. Additionally, in South Australia, we're under the National Hydrogen Strategy. We're leading the workforce skills and capability planning, and it's been an interesting process in terms of it's a bit like herding cats. So we're working across Australia to try and understand what industry wants. And the reality is that a lot of industry doesn't really know what they need just yet. So that's been one of our learnings so far. So I guess, from our side of things, we see hydrogen hubs as playing a critical role in scaling up the hydrogen industry. We really see the opportunity across the energy and mining sector. It was interesting to see Neil talk about methanol and ammonia, and we're looking at that closely, and we've been talking with OEMs around what are the potential fuels for future use in the mining industry for the heavy haul trucks and that side of things to displace diesel. And I think it'll end up being either an ammonia or a methanol or something similar to that. We're seeing the ability to decarbonise steel, decarbonise our copper, and we also have critical minerals that we can decarbonise that through a combination of renewable energy and hydrogen. The export modelling tool that we developed is really a tool that supports investors to make decisions around where and what they would like to produce, and I think that helps them understand a whole range of areas, and I would encourage you to go and have a look at that. Most importantly, we see that international coordination on regulation codes and standards to support global trade is essential. It's critical to make sure that we have a safe industry, and it's also critical to make sure that our industry is efficient moving forward, so that we minimise the capital outlay and constraints on adoption of hydrogen more broadly. I guess with any new industry, community engagement and social licence to operate is a key focus for us, and we are very keen to engage and understand people's opinions and make sure that we are explaining the benefits and some of the drawbacks. We're working closely we've got our first hydrogen electrolyser just being commissioned at the moment in South Australia, which will be delivering hydrogen into the natural gas network for about 700 homes as a trial over the next 5 years. Out of that, we'll gain a lot more knowledge and understanding of how people are prepared to adopt hydrogen, and that will also inform our decisions. So thanks very much, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nick, for that substantial overview of developments in South Australia. And I was interested. We hear about developments in Europe and things, but and also the Japan, Australia, and the Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi, as well as, and then engagement of BHP in South Australia is very interesting. We often hear also of the announcements in West Australia, and it's good to hear there are other activities obviously going on in Victoria, but also in South Australia as well. So that's great. Thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you. So what I'd like to do, maybe I'm testing fate here, but it would be to go to the question and answer session. And I'd hopefully, if everybody could turn their cameras on and mics, and we'll try this and see if the bandwidth holds. And if not, we'll have to make adjustments. Please raise your hand if you want to intervene or have a further discussion. And I see this as quite an interactive conversation. We've had a lot of questions coming in, and some of which I think can be answered, and others might be a little bit outside of our parish, but the people like to ask these questions anyway. Maybe what I'll start with, one overarching theme, and whoever would like to start, is around funding support and the funding support mechanisms. And we heard in some cases the business case already holds. In other cases, there is a significant role for public funding to move the project along, either to de-risk in some cases, or prove out or learn by doing. Is one example for a question for Neil was around a bit of learning by doing on the different projects that you're going. What was the funding mechanisms? What was the public support for that? Maybe, Neil, you can kick us off, and then others. The triggers and the key roles that public funding support is taking in the development of the valleys. Neil?
Yeah, sure. Make sure we got the right Neil. I'm assuming it's this one.
Yeah.
It doesn't even work. You say the guy with the glasses or the bald head. That doesn't work either, does it?
Well, that's Nick. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Funding. Principally the funding came from Europe for the first piece of the project. Some of the uses of the projects, or the use of hydrogen, have principally come from UK funding, such as from Innovate UK. So the Hydyne project for the ferry and the High Flyer project are both UK RI funded projects. But the initial part came through European funding, and in part that was Scottish Government funding for the initial electrolyser as well. So it has all been from the public space. We operate very much on the edge of the public-private space because we are here demonstrating technology and trying to help get it out into practical expression. So that's the sort of our natural habitat, really. One of the challenges we do have is where it is the point that was made about chicken and egg earlier. You have to create a market as well as a supply, and one of the things we've sought to do is to make sure that the cost of using hydrogen is not higher than the present uses. In other words, we're trying to displace diesel fuel in some certain things in the council ferry fleet. So we've had to make sure that we have found a way to not cost more. Now that's actually something of a sort of a fabrication, really, because I think we have to recognise that we can't afford to keep doing what we're doing at the moment. We can't afford to keep burning diesel because of either the air quality issues or indeed the planetary atmosphere issues. So it is a challenge at the moment to try and persuade people to pay more. But I think we're going to have to pay more for some of our fuels if we're going to decarbonise, and to assume this is a net zero game, I think, is rather foolish.
Okay. Others on the funding mechanisms, comments?
Yeah, look, I can talk about it from an Australian perspective. I guess that you know, we're a lot less dense in terms of population than other parts of the world, and so the infrastructure perhaps doesn't get the same utilisation. So there's been a key role for governments, both state and federal, to really support initial projects. You know, that there is that ability to look at displacing diesel in the first instance. But I think, you know, we're working on the fact that scale is going to help us bring down the cost of hydrogen more rapidly. And, you know, we do need to develop our local supply chains, but being a right-hand drive, small market a long way from Europe and the US means that we become a technology taker. And so really we need the equipment to be available in Australia, and until that equipment becomes more readily available, then the infrastructure is difficult to roll out. So there's a critical role for governments to play there.
Okay, great. Any other comments on that particularly?
Yeah, maybe just some broader points. Can you just show me by show of hands that you can hear me? Yeah, excellent, thank you. So I think if I come back to the survey that we did and the values we looked at broadly, we found that indeed of the values we looked at, around 85% still have some public funding in them, or to put it the other way, only 15% are fully privately funded. And those are particular cases where, as Tim said, the business case already holds, which is quite remarkable. We could go into detail there, but I think this is usually a combination of unique sort of local factors on the production supply, sometimes also transport and storage side, and a higher willingness to pay on the off-taker side, which may be regulation driven or have other reasons. Yeah? So that's just the raw numbers. And I think in terms of what that funding is used for, one interesting element I may want to highlight is we've seen also governments in some countries acknowledge the need for sort of stakeholder coalition building, partnership building, to already be sort of eligible costs for funding in a relatively early stage. So where a networking and matchmaking phase is already part of something that can be funded. Yeah, so it's not just about, you know, engineering studies and eventually assets being deployed, but even the activities that come before that, because, you know, they recognize the need that this is something that has to take place and needs to be supported.
Okay, great. Jacob, were you going to jump in there too? Oh, we can't hear. Can you hear us? Oh, okay, it'll be a second. So maybe I could ask back to, actually, I have a couple more for Nick here are coming in. You listed off a few things that were key actions, legislation, and things like that by governments. What are the key government actions to make Point now? Boynton, is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but a success. What is sort of are there two or three key government hurdles that you see that you need to address to make your hub go?
Yeah, look, I think if I think about it from a government perspective, it's about making sure that the legislation, the regulations that we provide are really clear and open. And actually having a really good ability to engage with project proponents is important for us to learn, but also for them to be able to have a degree of certainty and understanding around the project. So I think the co-location of Port Bonython and the sector coupling, I think that becomes really critical, and facilitating those discussions and engagements and facilitating relationships with the potential off-takers and long-term investors, I think, is the other piece that government has a really critical role to play in.
Okay, great. Jacob, I don't know if your mic is back up and going. No, still don't hear you. Okay. No. Okay, so maybe I'll go to, I had actually a couple for Jacob, but Randolf, we have a question here around, you gave some examples of the amount of wind generation that will be needed. And a number of comments and questions have come in about how much renewable resources there are in Northern Europe and in the European space. Are you thinking that really is, that your imports will be as high as you see them, or will there be more renewables? And what's the trajectory around the development of the renewables that you'll be able to draw upon within the kind of a North Sea space, maybe I could put it that way, that you see in the longer term trajectory?
Yeah. So in the study that we did, we took into account that a lot of the hydrogen also will be produced locally, and that of course also the networks, the pipelines will be used as well. So in Europe, we will definitely also generate a lot of the hydrogen, not only via the port of Rotterdam, also other regions, etc., that will be used. So actually, what we did was developing together with the industry and together with the customers that are in the port and also that are now connected to the port of Rotterdam, different visions and different scenarios to see, okay, how much hydrogen can we expect, and how does that hydrogen come to those customers? And what we saw is that there is still a gap then in the end, and this is how we calculate the 80 million tons. So yeah, there is a lot of renewable power that will be used, not only in the Netherlands. For example, we also work on the North Sea Wind Power Hub, where we try to make use of the North Sea as much as possible. And it is connected to Germany, it's connected to Denmark, to England. But what we see is the amount of energy that is needed, we will end up in a gap. And I'm sure that we will change that over time. We'll see what is the real scenario, what will be the reality in 2050. But from the data that we have, we could make the best guess today, and then we see that we have a gap of 80 million tons. Okay, that's great. And Jacob, one more time. You betcha, perfect. All right. You betcha. That's great. Okay, so we have actually a couple of questions for you have come in. And one of them is around knowledge sharing of both the investment cost and things linked to that, of both the trucks and the infrastructure that you're putting in. What's your strategy? How, I think a lot of people will be looking to see, here might be a benchmark that they want to look at. So that's one. And then I have another one as well. Maybe we can start with that.
Sure. It's a fairly easy answer. It's all happily public information. We're sharing it as often as we can in forums like this. We'll be part of the Hydrogen Valleys platform that's going live in a month or two. We're part of that, and we're happy to share more information as any questions come forward. And we have summary documents on the project itself. We'll be sharing quarterly reports with the reporting agency, since it is a publicly funded project. There's official reporting processes, which are all public documents, and we're happy to share any information about the funding side, where the costs went, additional costs that were incurred, challenges that came from the COVID-19 crisis. Any and all this information, more than happy to share.
Okay, great. The other slightly more technical question was the operating hours for the fuel cell trucks. What's kind of the plans for that?
I think that's the question, is how long can they go for? Where their projection is based on range of operation rather than time, simply because it has the the shift hours for a drayage operation at the Port of LA is a fairly established, this is how much your driver runs, 8 hours, so on and so forth. It's more how far can you go, how many trips can you make from the port to a warehouse and back, that kind of question. So these trucks are supposed to get 350 miles or so of loaded movement range before needing to refuel. And that's the purpose of the demonstration, is to learn exactly how well they do and get from that. And we're going to get started hopefully next week, so stay tuned.
Right. Okay. And do any of you have questions for you? I have it's a standing open invitation for you to ask questions of each other. So if you do, please raise your hand. In the meantime, Nick, maybe a question back to you relates to linkage to mining projects in South Australia. And you did mention BHP, of course, and things, and it was around the fossil fuel, your production links with the port. But is there links to the mining operations in South Australia as well? Is that being considered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've actually got some pretty innovative mining companies in South Australia who are already looking to integrate renewables into their existing operations. So I think, the hydrogen hub really provides that sort of ability to co-locate. I guess there's we're working on how do we decarbonise steel, how do we decarbonise aluminium, how do we decarbonise cement, which are all pretty important things. And then, longer term, probably trialling non-core equipment in some of these mines. And I think, when you start to talk about hydrogen in mines, it's what's the derivative of hydrogen? Is it going to be liquid hydrogen? Is it going to be ammonia? Is it going to be compressed? Is it going to be methanol? And how do they operate in different environments underground, for example? What's the, we've already seen a lot of research going to high tunnel for vehicles, but what's the research that needs to be done for ventilation systems and all those sort of intrinsically safe requirements? So I think we see that there's massive opportunities for the mining in terms of decarbonisation of minerals more broadly, and it's just a matter of, it's going to take a little bit more time to get to the equipment availability. So in the interim, we're looking at domestic use of the renewable ammonia will go into agricultural explosives and processing. So that starts to decarbonise that supply chain. You can start to do it with trucks and vehicles. I guess we're sort of waiting to see which trucks will become available. When we have heavy duty Class 8 trucks that pull 4 or 5 trailers, so that they're big loads. So but there is a great deal of interest in electrification and I think you combine it with AI and autonomous vehicles. You start to really go, okay, now we're going renewables, we're going hydrogen for fuels, we're talking about AI, we're talking about making mines safer more broadly, 5G networks to get more data and sensors, and you can really start to improve the productivity and the quality of the production of mines. So I think that's where we see exciting phase change.
Okay. Great. And you raised a very interesting point, and I think Neil also touched on it, and I'll come, Markus, in fact, this is going to be a question for you, but it's around the issue of transportation as being one of the leading drivers for the use of hydrogen in many cases. So we went to the ferries and heavy-duty vehicles, that kind of thing. Seems to be one of the key drivers. But I'm interested, Markus, from your review, as Nick flagged this sector coupling and the engagement with the other sectors. And I think both in the Port of Rotterdam, I think this will be key as well. They make Randolf has made reference to the chemical industries and others. I'm wondering, in your review of some of these key valleys, transportation, I assume, is one of the key things, but maybe you could just remind us, what are the other sectors that seem to be coming to the fore? Is it the chemical, steel, cement? Are those kind of the key ones that seem to be coming to the fore, or are there others? Sorry.
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
The one phrase of 2020. Once again, the short answer is yes, and then the longer answer is a bit more nuanced. So yes, big industrial or sort of we call this, you know, industry in industrial offtake versus mobility offtake is the second big bucket. And I think here you have the typical industries that were already mentioned, especially existing hydrogen off-takers which need to decarbonize their feedstock, basically. So ammonia production, methanol production, refineries, green steel and cement, because you know that entails some more profound transformation of production processes. We did not see that yet in the valley landscape that we surveyed, actually, or not to a larger extent. But industry clearly is the number two. I think once again we also have to be a bit careful with the definition of hydrogen valleys and how this whole thing came about, because as I mentioned before, a lot of these regional initiatives were driven by policymakers, which for example are naturally close to public transport operators. So we have a lot of buses there in those projects. We have a lot of also refueling stations, and the infrastructure in the city typically plays an important role, just because some of the initiators of these valleys are close to the kind of public policy making circles in and around transport. So there may be an inherent bias in there, I guess. But what I'm saying is, when you ask them why mobility, why industry, well, for mobility, as I mentioned, showcasing hydrogen, best business case out there right now because of highest willingness to pay and experience with mobility already. They want to just take to the next stage. And for industry is the realization, well, we have to tackle it because these are the industries that will need clean hydrogen to decarbonize. So this is our natural focus. And then also for industry, for the project developers' point of view, I'd say, no, you project developers want to focus on large anchor load off-takers. Yeah, so big industrial off-takers who will consume tens of thousands of tons of clean hydrogen, and those long-term off-take agreements will make a project commercially viable.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks for that. And maybe as a follow-on to that, Neil, you did make a reference to agriculture. This is another area that, and I guess I assume it's the ammonia is the trigger, or what are some of I have to admit I haven't heard agriculture raised that often. And Chile has mentioned it, but it's not that often it's raised. So maybe you could give us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're an agricultural island, so we have ferries are big for us, but also agricultural plant is big for us. So tractors, load-alls, various pieces of plant and machinery, and it'll be interesting to see which way this goes, because I suspect we might end up with agriculture following shipping in this case, because if the shipping ends up dominating the space and going, actually it's going to be methanol or whatever it is, or ammonia, then I imagine agriculture may well be able to fit into that and go, yeah, okay, well, we will use that as well, because the scale that shipping is going to need is probably going to dominate. That you're going to have some massive infrastructure to put this sort of stuff in, because these are, multi megawatt ships running for many days, if not weeks, on very, very long routes. And so they only fuel at either end. So you're going to need some big infrastructure at those points. And it'd be interesting to see whether we end up with an effect whereby the dominant marine fuel at those ports spreads out into the agricultural hinterlands because it's freely available, because the infrastructure will be put in. And I think it'll be interesting to see how there's this cross-fertilization, no pun intended there.
Right, and maybe Jacob and Randolph, you can also comment on that. The idea of what is there already interest, or what will be the infrastructure build for the initial initiatives? Is that triggering conversations on the knock-on to the next stages already, or not yet? They're trying to learn what the situation currently is, or are you already starting to get engagement based on the infrastructure that you are going to be putting in? Jacob, maybe you first.
Sure. I think the answer is kind of both, depending on which sector you're referring to and kind of which players you're talking about. Our project specifically is clearly more landside focused rather than marine, so we're definitely seeing a lot more engagement from our other on-road operators, from our terminal domicile. We got some folks looking at terminal equipment, tractors, and heavy lifts and that kind of thing, that are starting to expand their interest in hydrogen because they see that same business case applying to them. But I think Neil's point is very well taken, that the scale of marine shipping could very much change that conversation as they come in. If ammonia or methanol makes more sense and they're starting to look for the capability to bunker at our facilities, that's a massive infrastructure project that then has greater use for the region. So finding that key point. Our marine folks are starting to look into it. We definitely see some folks exploring it, but I wouldn't say there's a concrete plan yet. But as that interest rises, we start seeing a lot more in the greater region, which is, I think, the whole Hydrogen Valley concept we're discussing today, right? Is that the more interest you have in one location, other sectors start paying that same attention because of the overall cost and availability of the fuel, in this case hydrogen, makes more sense for everybody else. So, yeah.
Right. And Randolf, on your side, the triggers of the infrastructure build, and in fact, some of the questions linking to the other ports, but also on the shipping itself. There's the shipment of the hydrogen as a commodity, but also use in the motive application. Are you seeing those conversations? How are those conversations unfolding now?
Yeah. So what you see in the Port of Rotterdam is that it really depends indeed also to what customer and what sector you're talking to. So for example, in the trucks and inland navigation, the discussions are already going on for making use of hydrogen in gaseous form. So they store it in under 500 to 600 bars, I think, at least in the inland navigations, and 350 in the trucks. If you look to the seagoing vessels, they are more focusing on ammonia currently. Also, the projects are not so far that compared to the inland navigation and the trucks. So it really depends to which sector you're talking to, because and what they see is as the best option for on the shorter notice to use in this sector.
Okay. Okay, any follow-up to that? That's I think that's it always takes a trigger, and then others definitely will be interested, and we'll see how who comes next will be an interesting thing, and whether I think government funding support and what other things are coming. I guess one of the questions, sure, please.
Yeah, just to chip in there as well. I mean, I've just posted a note to somebody online about it, and this issue about shipping, I think, is fundamental, and I do worry at the moment that some of the statements that are coming out of people, say, like the International Maritime Organization, are somewhat behind the curve. So I think they've recently said, I think it was March, so this time they're getting to get 50% decarbonisation by 2050. Sorry guys, wake up! It's too slow. Move it up. So they've got to shift up a gear here. And the thing is that because of the longevity of shipping, if we're going to see stuff at net zero by 2050, some of the ships around in 2050 are being launched today. So we've really got to get with the program, and I also think it could be catalytic, because it could really change the game up, because of the point I was making earlier about scale. Suddenly we're going to find that we can do things. One of the challenges we've had is trying to do something at a very, very small scale, and when something doesn't work, everything stops. And you've got to get that resilience. You've got to get something going, and it may not be perfect, but you get off the beach and move into the ground. And if you stay with small scale stuff, you're heavily hampered. So we really do need to see some big moves in some of these spaces. And that in turn will liberate and unlock things. It may not be right, but it'll be more right than we are at the moment.
Right.
I think also you're going to end up with much like we have petrol, diesel, gas now. I think you're going to end up with a range of different hydrogen derivatives and fuels. You know, like we have LNG ships now that, you know, not necessarily all running on diesel. So, you know, that we're going to be carting liquid hydrogen, we're going to be carting ammonia, we're going to be carting all, you know, potentially methanol, you know, CO2 direct air capture or something like that. So there's going to be a whole range of different ships running different fuels depending on the cargoes that they're taking. So I think that, you know, there needs to be a degree of flexibility, and ultimately I think over time you'll start to see the economics for, you know, push people down one pathway. But I think that there is going to be a wide variety depending on what the end use is for, you know, export cargoes of hydrogen.
Right. As kind of a follow-on, Randolf, I don't know if you had wanted to add something there particularly, or no? Maybe Markus, just something I was wondering about is on scale. As Neil mentioned, you know, we really have to, folks are moving away from sort of small pilot demo one-offs and are really starting to move into the scale size. And I'm wondering if in your scan and your review of the hydrogen valleys that you see, maybe even in the time frame that you've been working on it, have you seen the scale and scope grow even within projects, or are they, and I guess my first question is around what's the range in scale, and then do you see them starting to get bigger even as they start to think about it and develop it more, would be my knock-on question.
Yes, and yes. I would say let's look at that because that's interesting. Yes, the projects are getting bigger. So if you look at the full range of the sample that we looked at, those nearly 3 dozens of of valleys, the start of operations of the project, the earliest was in 2018. So there are projects on that list which are already up and running, like the Orkney project is one of them, or at least in large parts. And the last one will come operational at the end of the decade. So that's the spread. And if we've plotted them on a timeline, and the further you look into the decade, the larger the projects become. So indeed, I think, you know, it's clearly picking up. And, you know, when you case in point are the European IPHE projects that I mentioned. They all look to take it even in Europe to the gigawatt scale. That's certainly true for Australia. That's true for the Middle East. So I think that's indeed. And now, and as I mentioned, investment volume, smallest project 20 million, largest project more than 5 billion. Yeah, so it's that range. All of them are integrated valley projects. Within the projects now it gets interesting because we see both. We see kind of a classic kind of phased approach, starting small, growing bigger, from local to regional. But what we also see is projects who initially started big and then realized, oh, we actually have to de-risk some key elements and we have to go smaller again to eventually get to where we want to go. So to give you a specific example, when you have a project that's looking to build a whole hydrogen value chain with production, conversion, transportation, reconversion, end use. While some of these projects may have sort of long-range, pan-European, maybe intercontinental transportation in mind, a lot of them then decide to initially start smaller with local production and local offtake and without the transport link, because they figure, well, we got an electrolyzer technology we have to fully scale up first. Yeah, and I think maybe just to be clear, when I said during my presentation, I didn't mean to say technology is no longer a question. By all means, that's not true. What is striking for me is when you ask people to put the key challenges at the top of the list, technology is no longer at the top of the list. It's still up there. Yeah, so they have to de-risk those things. That's why they go smaller again before eventually as different stepping stones towards going big. And I think that's adding more elements of the value chain, deploying more assets, etc. So I think this is. I hope this answers your questions in terms of what we see out there.
Right. Okay. I'm just looking at the time. We have not much left. I do want to do a quick roundtable and get views and some of the issues that we had is what are the issues that have been identified in moving forward on the Hydrogen Valley, recommendations to others exploring the Hydrogen Valley concepts and issues in their region. Maybe you could think about that just for a moment. And the idea there is, okay, from your perspective, what you have seen, what were some unexpected hurdles that needed to be addressed that you didn't think about necessarily, or that kind of surprised you a little bit? And then for those that are contemplating stepping into this space and doing it, what are a couple of gems, 1 or 2 gems that you might sage advice? Okay, maybe. Okay, let's say just notes to consider when they're going forward. And for me, for example, I always wonder if we do enough, and I come back to my social engagement and social experience as well. Is stakeholder engagement kind of early on? Has that been done? For example, that would be one that I kind of wonder about when valleys are coming. The technical guys get together, the policy guys get together, and it's a great thing. But we're missing a whole pillar here as we develop. So that would be one. So something kind of unique that jumped out at you that you didn't really realize when you were moving forward, and then a couple of maybe 1 or 2 points that you might want to flag for those that are considering moving into the hydrogen space and moving into this. Now, I don't know who wants to take up the baton first for those 2 questions. This will be the roundtable, and basically as a wrap up, if you have any other final comments as well. So this is the window. Let's start.
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
Sure, I'll take the first shot, and I'll emphasize what you were saying, Tim, and what Markus has pointed out a couple of times in the past here about that. Like you said, stakeholder engagement, building a diverse stakeholder coalition to really look at what your needs are in your region. What are you when you talk about a hydrogen valley? You want to look at a specific facility. Are you say you're a government agency, a city looking to take a step into hydrogen. Well, great. A transit, your transit agency, buses, as Markus has mentioned a couple of times, that's a reasonable starting place, but it's not going to get you to this greater expansion that we were just discussing. So you need to be looking at what other industries in your area, what other stakeholders can you bring to the table to really develop your plan longer term than just started a project and we did it, check a box, we're done. This is, the needs we've been, Neil's done a great job of discussing, the need that we need to get this stuff out there and get moving faster than a lot of the timelines that we've laid out already. But you can't do that with just starting some project and assuming you're going to get there in the long term. We need to look at the use case you have in your location and how that greater connects to the regions around the world. We're talking ports here, right? We're international by nature. And that's a great starting place. Maybe that's not true for you, but maybe it is. Maybe there's other connections that you can work on. So that's the kind of piece of advice I would say is start by looking at what are you going to use hydrogen for, and bring that team together and get everyone working to the same goal.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I'm happy to go on and follow on from Berger, because I think that you make a really good point, but hydrogen is such a flexible energy vector, and I think that thinking broadly in terms of where the opportunities lie is what I think is really critical. It's not just a transport fuel; it's a multi-dimensional energy vector, and so that sector coupling becomes really important in terms of value adding and taking byproducts from one process and using them in another. So I think that's part of the circular economy, and that's where the real opportunity lies with hydrogen hubs. From our perspective as a government, You know, the formation of the Hydrogen Regulatory Working Group was really critical in terms of upskilling. You know, from a Department of Energy and Mining perspective, you know, we'd drunk the Kool-Aid a long time ago. We thought it was fantastic, but upskilling other agencies like the EPA and Environment and Water, you know, the Metropolitan Fire or the Emergency Services people, Safe Work SA, you know, helping them to understand hydrogen and, you know, put them in front of proponents and you know, there's some quirks in legislation, you know, like hydrogen production in South Australia is required to have a chemical manufacturing license. So, you know, there are little quirks in your legislation and regulations that you find as a result of that and that you just don't expect. So, you know, taking that time to actually engage with proponents and look into it yourself is a really good way of finding some of those gaps.
Perfect. Okay. Maybe we'll go to Randolf, then we'll go to Neil and Markus at the end. So Randolf, next, please.
Yeah. Well, I fully agree with you. What we saw as well is that sector is very
just maybe if the others could hit maybe mute. We're getting a little bit of feedback here. We'll all hit mute. Off you go, Randolf. Great.
Yeah. Perfect. So I fully agree with Nick. So the sector coupling is really important. We see it already on the part of the electrolyzer, where you can couple the electricity sector with the gas sector with the heat sector. And we also see it from the demand side. So and that's of course also a difficulty here, because what kind of quality do you need for the hydrogen in order to serve all or most of the sectors? So it's really a use case, I think, also indeed for what is in the port, what kind of sectors are there, what is close to what are you serving with the port, because the industry requires a different quality compared to the transportation sector, and if you use it for heat, maybe you need a lower quality of hydrogen. And how can we serve that? How can we make use of the best one infrastructure or not so many infrastructure to serve all those different sectors? And that's only in the form of hydrogen, because we also see that hydrogen is, it can come as ammonia, it can come as another product. And this is something, if you can use that directly as well, you shouldn't convert it back to hydrogen first. So it's quite a complex structure there.
Yeah. Okay, great. Then Neil, please, and then Markus.
Yeah. I think to pick up on the point that Nick was making about the circularity, and the one thing I think we should have done from the start was look at the heat, because there is waste heat in these processes, and they're not generally, that's not a thing that the electrolyzer manufacturers are looking at particularly. So it feels as though we should be looking to try and do something there. I'd say be careful and be moderate. If you, as advice to the people coming along, you know, we haven't had a disaster with hydrogen yet, and we need to be ready for that, because when we do have something, we mustn't have overhyped this. We need to be moderate and show that it's responsible, it's being done by good engineering, and it's being done carefully, because there will be problems. If we can persuade Hollywood that it doesn't explode in the way that they seem to show in every damn film, that would be quite useful. But I would really like to make sure that we have brought the regulators along. We too have hit problems where we've had people trying to use gas on ships, and they're required to go and do training, which involves them learning how to handle LNG, which is, you know, cold, heavy, and goes in the opposite direction, where we're using stuff that's light and at air temperature. You know, the regulations really are a nuisance, and it takes time to work your way through that. But find an advocate in the regulator who can help see the future, and then help them get you through the regulatory minefield.
Okay, that's great. That's a very nice gem there. Thank you very much. And Markus, please.
Yeah, I think I think what every one of my fellow panelists said is also reflected in the conversations we've had throughout this this initiative. So I'd start with Jacob. You know, start with the needs. and the assets you have in a region, and take 5 steps back and look at that. And when you start to have a picture, then I think it's important to dare to think big first, in kind of what could this ultimately look like? Where would hydrogen really play a role, and where wouldn't it actually? Whereas battery electrification, other decarbonization solutions, where are they clearly the more efficient, the cheaper, the better options? And when you think big, then afterwards, and this comes back to the point of be modest and humble as well. Cut it into packages of individual projects that you can pursue and you can actually master, and then look at the synergies between them. And like the waste heat example, in terms of what how things support each other, how things feed into each other, and how that helps. And I think that's at least I think what a lot of the now successful, or until here successful valleys have done. And when it comes to the political support, I would also say dare to reach out to policymakers early on. We've heard a lot of stories in our conversations with the valleys of support from policymaker side that they didn't even think of initially, or didn't even imagine, because and whether then that translates into regulation, permitting rules and procedures being adjusted, or just political buy-in and backing, door openings left and right, etc. It doesn't matter, but I think it's important to acknowledge that for many of these valleys, simply because it's new technology in many cases and it hasn't been done before, this can only work as a public-private partnership in the quite literal sense, and that's why it's important to dare to reach out early when you have an idea. So I think maybe that sort of wraps up everything the other 4 said, but sort of like I said, this is fully in line with what we've seen in the wider field of valleys out there.
Perfect. That was great. So with those gems of wisdom, it's now time to draw the forum to a close. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Markus Kaufmann from Roland, Berger, Randolf Weterings from the Port of Rotterdam, thank you. Neil Kermode from Orkney, the Orkney Islands. That was great to see there the developments. Jacob Goldberg from the Port of Los Angeles, thank you very much. And Neil Smith from South Australia. And of course, I'd also like to thank Patrick Child from the European Commission for kicking it off and giving us the great overview. And to everybody online, thank you very much for your participation and engagement. And we all look forward to more hydrogen valleys being developed and the progress on this file. So again, thank you very much, everybody. And with that, I'd like to draw this forum to a close. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.